Welcome to the Emisarios Unidos de Luz channel. If you enjoy this near-death experience story, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. I grew up in a Christian home, yet in my teenage years, I favored philosophy over religious dogma, and embracing the tenets of existentialism, I abandoned what little belief I had in God. My NDE occurred after I accidentally poisoned myself with creek water, contracting cholera. I had already taken several gulps from the cooler in the back of the work truck when we heard our supervisor shouting not to drink the water. 3 days later, one morning, my roommates noticed I didn't look well and offered to take me to the hospital, but I declined, deeming such measures unnecessary. They mentioned they had plans to go to the Grand Canyon but, out of concern for my health, were considering canceling the trip. I reassured them that I would be fine taking care of myself and that they shouldn't cancel on my account. Some time after they left for their trip, I began to suffer the most excruciating abdominal pain before passing out in the bathroom. After awakening some time later, I managed to crawl back to my room only to pass out once again from the unbearable pain in my stomach. After falling unconscious, I remember floating upward and looking down upon my body from my position above it. From my position a few feet above the bed, I noticed my dog enter the room and attempt to rouse me as he began licking my hand. I tried to reassure him by making contact, but as I attempted to stroke his fur, my hand seemed to pass through his body. As I moved about the room in my spirit body, I felt wonderfully free and relieved that I wasn't experiencing pain anymore. As I floated upward, through the ceiling to a position above the roof outside the house, I could see and hear the children kicking a can down the street and the various activities of my neighbors. As I watched and listened to them from my elevated position, I realized how wrong I had been for so long to deny the world of the spirit. Suddenly, I found myself in a void of all-encompassing blackness. Surprisingly, being enveloped by such pervasive darkness was not unpleasant. In fact, I felt wonderfully elated as I basked in the magnificence of the light bursting forth from the distant star towards which I was traveling in that vast continuum, the light of pure love. As I delighted in the light, I listened to a song whose lyrics I couldn't initially understand, but as I drew closer to the source of the music, I was able to resolve the lyrics of a song describing God's attributes, His magnificence, and His nature. Within the chorale, I was able to distinguish a single voice speaking directly to me, its words revealing things about my deeper nature. The presence embodied by that voice, through a series of images, showed me my entire life, from childhood to the present. In that presentation, I saw myself as a young child, aware of my parents, who were always patient with me, even when I misbehaved. I saw how badly I treated my relatives as I got older, especially during the period when I abused drugs and stole from them. Through music, the presence revealed how abject my life had become amid melodies exalting the glory and grandeur of God. It was through the symphony of such sublime euphony that the presence answered all my existential questions and countered every argument denying the existence of God and the spiritual realm. As I drew closer to the light, I saw what appeared to be a glorious city, which, however, turned black when I tried to approach it. I remember then descending and landing on a rock, where I saw a robed figure descending a flight of stairs, a figure whom, to my astonishment, I recognized as Jesus. Initially, I felt relieved, imagining that Jesus would take me to heaven, but as I stood before him, fear and trepidation filled me. Suddenly I fell forward and hit the floor before I was placed back on my feet before the Lord. The Lord, standing slightly above me, began communicating single ideas that would then unfold to reveal a library of information. As Jesus spoke, I realized that it was His great love and compassion I felt upon my arrival, and it was through His boundless love that I could see with utter clarity the small-minded and egotistical sense of self I had identified with since my teenage years. Through this heightened lucidity, I was able to see how I had denounced the most profound, compassionate, and gracious love imaginable. As a selfish and egotistical person, I stole from, betrayed, abandoned, neglected, and plotted against others. As I stood before Jesus, I felt as though I had betrayed Him to the people who crucified Him, just as I had betrayed the people in my life who loved me. Standing upright before Him, it felt as though the Lord was saying, "This is what you did to the love I gave you. This is what you did with the gift of life I gave you." As I stood before Him, I became overwhelmed with terror because I knew that the Lord could see right through me. I realized that it was in my pride and arrogance that I had entertained the notion that Jesus would even want me in heaven. In my haughtiness, I reasoned that, by virtue of not killing anyone, such abstinence was reason enough to permit me entry into heaven, conveniently ignoring all the other ways I had killed them, through my judgment, mockery, and betrayal. I was remiss in demonstrating to others the grace, mercy, and compassion that God showed me, as I made pride and arrogance my gods. You'll see a land that's best forgotten but should not be left unseen. When you arrive, say my name and my title. An option has yet to be decided, Jesus said. I then moved to Jesus' left side, and from there, I was lifted by some unseen force. I looked down at my body and noticed that I was barefoot and filthy, dressed in dirty cotton pajamas with a cloth belt. It was then that I began to float towards a doorway. The door opened upward like a scroll, and I passed through it to find myself in a tunnel. That tunnel suddenly transformed into a hideous green-yellow vortex, within which chaos similar to that found within a tornado unfolded. Through that rotating maelstrom, I found myself traveling towards a distant yellow light, listening to shrieks that gradually increased in intensity. Upon passing through the yellow light, I fell to the ground in a realm that I knew was hell. As I stood up and surveyed the landscape, I noticed that I was on top of a hill, and in the distance, I could see my parents' old home, surrounded by dead trees. I watched as people began emerging from the house and passing through the valley to greet me. "Brian, welcome to paradise. You're going to enjoy it here. Do you feel the love?" they asked. What they called love, however, felt like a sickly sweet, posturing, pretentious type of love that I had become familiar with on earth. These professions of love were declared by beings whose eyes would appear as those of alligators one moment, only to change back to human eyes the next. As I looked around, I saw those people begin to morph into grotesque creatures, some of which resembled the Mesopotamian demon god Pazuzu. To my disincarnate perception, those beings would vacillate between their human-appearing form and their grotesque monstrous form as they surrounded me and prepared themselves to attack. It was at that moment that I remembered Jesus' instructions, so I kept repeating the name Jesus Christ to keep them from being able to attack me. In reaction to my mantra, the monsters kept their distance, but the presence of one whose appearance resembled a raptor made me nervous. "Follow me. I'll take you on a tour of the kingdom," he beckoned. Not knowing what else to do, I followed him through a doorway in an invisible wall. The raptor demon then took me to a place where the heat and stench were overwhelmingly obnoxious, a place where the dirt road was lined with hordes of demonic entities and spirits, and horrible shrieks and wailing filled the air. As I took in the landscape of that place, I saw molten rock spilling down the sides of rocky hills, flowing into valleys filled with pools of lava, while people emerged from swirling vortices. As I turned to look behind me in that forlorn terrain, I saw a 10-foot cube that, once entered, would reveal to the occupant an interminable expanse. The ambience of that expanse would be shaped by the darker elements of the occupant's mental landscape, serving as a mental prison or torture chamber. The raptor demon then led me to the edge of an abyss lined with a spiral staircase, and when I looked over its edge, I saw cubic cells descending into a vortex. The spiral staircase that lined the bottomless abyss granted access to the various levels of hell, and it was at these deeper levels that the torment experienced by the occupants would intensify. We then walked to an area where an innumerable number of cubes were stacked 6 high. As I observed the cube's occupants within that region, I was able to instantly understand who each person was, their life history, and the reason they were in hell. These people were those who never truly sought God, those whom the Lord reached out to save but who rejected his calling. I looked into one of the cubes and saw a woman who had just arrived in hell, being greeted by her deceased relatives in the parlor of her grandparents' home, just as I had been upon my arrival. "Welcome to paradise," said the demon who appeared as her grandmother. As they communicated, I watched the demon struggle to maintain the charade, ultimately revealing its true nature when it became undeniably clear to the woman that she was not in a place of purity but rather a place designed to ravage her soul. I saw tentacles, which at first appeared to be branches of a tree, grab her as she screamed in horror. I understood how, during her life, she had given the impression of being a very good and decent person, while in truth, she had concealed her gloomy, tyrannical nature from everyone outside of her family. When she was attacked by the demons of hell, she realized where she actually was and awakened to the flaws of character that had led to her damnation. As surrounding creatures scoffed at and mocked me, I kept repeating the name of Jesus Christ, hoping I would be spared from spending even a moment longer in that infernal realm. As we walked onward, I watched multiple people enter a realm they believed, upon arrival, to be a place of paradise, only to later find themselves in a place of darkness, deception, and intrigue. In that place of eternal torment, I recognized a person who I later identified as the Nazi named Reinhard Heydrich, the one said to have engineered the Holocaust. In his cube, I sensed the hate and cruelty that consumed him, as well as the excruciating frustration he felt as he lost one fencing bout after another to his opponent. I watched others in their cells, living out their worst nightmares, which seemed to worsen with each repetition. I saw a man who, during his life, had been a hateful atheist and a fascist, being burned in an oven. The raptor demon led me onward until we eventually reached the part of hell dedicated to those who, during their lives, practiced what is known as mind control. Since I had practiced it myself, I was to be imprisoned among those who indulged in such dark practices. On the last leg of the journey, I felt a powerful force pulling me towards what would become my home for all eternity. As I attempted to resist, I listened to little white moths with teeth and worm-like creatures yelling blasphemies and heckling me. Even though I fought against my inevitable internment, I knew I deserved eternal damnation for living life centered around self-interest at the expense of the dignity and happiness of others, and for rejecting the opportunities for salvation that had been offered to me. In that moment, I gave up all hope of salvation, believing that the love connection I had once shared with the Lord had long since ended. Even though I told myself this, I still didn't want to go, yet with each passing moment, I grew weaker. Suddenly, I heard great booming noises as someone approached me from behind. I thought it was Lucifer himself, ready to toss me into my cell, but when the creatures of hell, including my raptor demon guide, heard the commotion, they scurried off. As I braced myself, expecting to be tossed into a cube, I suddenly found myself being rescued. Looking down upon the arm that was embracing me, I could see that he who rescued me had holes in his wrists, and I watched as the bones of his forearm separated as he lifted me. On the verge of tears, I felt immense gratitude for the compassion he was extending towards me, kindness I knew I didn't deserve. As I watched his bones separate, I realized what a burden I had been to Christ in the way I had lived my life, and I knew that it was people like me who crucified Jesus. It was at that moment that I turned towards his shoulder and began crying like a baby, and as I wept, he carried me out of that place via a vortex, and we traveled back to the place where I had first laid eyes on him, setting my feet on solid rock as he installed a new song in my heart. He then blew on me, and I fell backwards into the blackness of the void. In the void, he spoke to me about many things, too many, in fact, to recount here. After some time, I emerged from the void and found myself entering through the ceiling of my home. The next thing I knew, I was back in my body, leaning against the porch railing, and it was from there that the neighbors grabbed me and drove me to the hospital. I recall praying to Jesus when I arrived home after being discharged from the hospital, "Lord Jesus, save my soul, as I don't want to be counted among the damned. Forgive me of my sins as I dedicate my life to you," I prayed. It was at that moment that a cool breeze entered the house, and the person I was, and my life, was entirely changed. With the help of the people of the Baptist Church, I was able to quit drinking, and they supported me through the PTSD I suffered as a result of my ordeal. Later, I would talk to a few ministers and the pastor about my NDE. Even though I didn't want to be around people, God, through his loving power, forced me to be among them and wouldn't allow me to be alone. I realized that the reason he allowed me to experience heaven was so that I would always remain hopeful about a destiny there. The best advice I can give people is to humble yourself before the Lord and pray to him, asking for help with everything, especially in those moments when you feel most lost or separated from him. In him, you will be born anew.